It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!
That the only thing we have to fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre.
We're alive! We're alive! We're alive over here at The Fear of God with episode 26. Ladies and gentlemen, we have crossed the first quarter of 100 episodes. I couldn't be happier about that. And we are here with a very, very special episode for you today. And by we, I mean myself, Reed Lackey, and my monster. Ladies and gentlemen, we're trying something experimental. Actually, all of Nathan's responses are going to be
Frankensteinian. We're going to use that.
They're going to be Frankensteinian, as it were.
Yes. Not really.
So,
thank you, Reed. Yes, with you is me. With you, as always, is Garth.
But we're having a conversation about the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. And it's been a few episodes since we've done this, but some of you listeners may have thought we abandoned it, but we did not. We are examining all year long the classic Universal monster movies. Last month we covered 1931's Dracula, directed by Todd Browning and starring Bela Lugosi. And today we are going to be diving into the second installment in that series, also from 1931, directed by James Whale. It is the classic, iconic Frankenstein. So I'd like to open with something that has absolutely nothing to do with Frankenstein. Just very briefly, I have said for many years, for longer than I ever should have, I have said that I was a firm believer that M. Night Shyamalan had more good films in him. I knew it. I defended The Village, even though it has its problems. We both did on our pilot episode. We defended.
I adore The Village.
Yeah. I even am a kind of an apologist for Lady in the Water, even though that film has a lot of apologies.
There, but yeah, a lot of apologies to make there. Yeah.
But yeah, I parted ways with him at The Happening. I did not. I still cannot stand The Happening. I don't.
It's so bad.
I think it's terrible. And even though I saw Last Airbender and After Earth, I mean, it was painful to see what was happening.
Wow, I'm impressed.
I've seen everything. I've seen it all.
It's like Patrick Stewart on that episode of Extras. I see everything.
I've seen everything. But I said, even during those movies, I said, you can't make a film like Sixth Sense. You can't make a film like Unbreakable. You can't even make a film like Signs and not have more good stories in you to tell. Something's going on. He's going through some sort of phase. I always rooted for him, always believed in him. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have not gone out to see Split, and it is still available by the time this episode airs. Yeah, don't worry. I'm going to be very careful here, but you have got to see Split. I think it's a fantastic film. I can officially say that M. Night Shyamalan is back. In my opinion, it is his strongest film since Signs, and some people might think it's probably better than Signs after they see it. I don't know how I feel about that, but it's definitely his strongest film since Signs, and as of this weekend, it is officially his most successful film since The Sixth Sense.
Wow.
Because it's topped the box office 3 weekends in a row. So I'm very, very happy to announce that my faith in the filmmaker has been restored. Split is a very, very good movie, and I think everybody should see it.
Well, Did he direct or just produce The Visit? What was his role in that?
He wrote, directed, produced The Visit.
Oh,
The Visit is all him.
Yeah, I need to catch that. I'm pretty sure it's streaming now. So I think I saw that it was streaming on Netflix or Amazon or something. Yeah.
I loved The Visit. The Visit didn't quite give me enough to say he's back.
Sure.
But I loved it. And, but now.
But it was enough for him to be like, I'll be back.
Basically.
Like he was coming back. Like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with Split, I don't have to make any defenses or apologies. Like, Split is good. Like, Split is officially good.
So, like, it's not like you're of two minds about it. Like, you are definitively, like...
I'm not of two minds about it. I'm not of 23 minds about it, as a matter of fact. It's a good movie. It's solid.
So, did you read today? I think it was today. We're recording on a Sunday, but, you know, sometimes these trade magazines release information on Sundays that he announced that he's going to go and make a sequel to The Happening. Like, and it's just called What's Happening.
You're just bound and determined to make me mad, aren't you?
What's happening? Yeah, what's happening?
No, and then he's going to make it a trilogy. The third one's going to be, hey, what happened?
Hey, what happened? Oh, but we've just made a dramatic shift from Shyamalan to...
we have. Boy, we're all over the place with here. But I just wanted to say, there was any... I did, that if there was anybody who had their doubts or reservations, Split is an objectively really good movie. Very strong entry for him, and I'm happy to announce that he's back. Everybody should see it. Nathan, go see it. Please.
I want to.
Please go see it.
I'm too busy watching these other movies.
Stay tuned for the companion film to Frankenstein, ladies and gentlemen.
Called Young Frankenstein. It's a prequel.
But I will say, Nathan, even if you happen to miss it in the theater,
I'll watch it. Yeah, I'll see it sometime.
Please try to see it before its surprise is spoiled for you, and that's all I'm going to say. And listeners, to you as well.
I don't know anything. Like, I've not read anything.
Don't.
But what I don't love, and this is why I need to see it like promptly, is my brain will start trying to forecast, like, where is this going to go? And so I need to, like, I have to actively shut that off, which is difficult.
Right. Yes. Yeah, you should. It's great. Well,
in other news, are you, before we jump into Frank, our friend Frank. So today is Sunday, February 5th. And it's Super Bowl night, which I don't care to talk about that per se, but did you see there's a Stranger Things 2 trailer that released tonight?
I did, and my wife and I gleefully watched it, and we're very, very excited about it. It's coming Halloween. The episodes are dropping Halloween. I'm going to go ahead. We didn't pre-brief this, but I'm sure you'll be on board for this. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to spoil something for you, the listener, about the fear of God.
And me, the co-host.
Ladies and gentlemen, we asked on our last major survey if we were going to cover a TV show, which TV show would you want us to cover? And you gave us a few options. I'm gonna spoil for you that Stranger Things won. So we've been trying to figure out for a while now how to cover Stranger Things, and I'm gonna go ahead and tell you right now. So Stranger Things Season 2 is dropping in Halloween. So I'm gonna go ahead and tell you that you can expect from the fear of God a Stranger Things Season 1 and Stranger Things Season 2 coverage sometime in November. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that that's going to happen. We'll make it happen. So those of you who are chomping at the bits saying, when are we going to cover it? Which just means I need
to start my rewatch now.
Possibly. But yeah, we're going to cover those together. And we're going to wait until Season 2 drops and then we might do Season 1, around September to space them out a little bit. But I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, we will correspond our coverage of Stranger Things in response to your survey around the time when Season 2 drops. Because Season 2 looks great already. Just hearing that music again just gave me chills. Yeah, I love it. I love it so much.
I would, listen, I am a fan of the things that are Stranger. And in other Stranger Things news, you see they won Best Ensemble at, it was not the Golden Globes. There was some award ceremony from a few nights ago.
Really?
Yeah.
It wasn't the SAG Awards, was it?
I think it might have been. Yep.
Really? Yep. Oh, wow.
They actually beat out
fantastic.
Game of Thrones. It was a big deal. And David Harbour, I think, is the name of the guy who plays the lead, the sheriff. See, I don't have this information in front of me because I didn't know we were going here.
Yeah, I didn't.
But he gives a really fantastic speech. You and our listeners ought to go check it out. It's pretty exciting. And Winona Ryder's a little kooky and quirky in it.
That's great. No, that excites me. I did not know that. That's great.
Reed, since you asked, right now I am reading a book called, it's recommendation time.
Yeah.
Noah Hawley, who is the showrunner for Fargo and is the showrunner for the soon to be, by the time this airs, to have already been released, Legion on FX. Has a novel called After the Fall. Which I'm about 50% of the way through. You like how I just worked that in, I
do, yeah.
But since we're recommending things, I will say, it might not actually be, I think it's going to end up being a fantastic book, but I was not prepared. It's very much about, media and politics in a way that I'm like, oh man, yeah.
Huh.
I'm getting a whole lot of this in the real world. Now I'm reading a novel about it. All that said,
it's called After the Fall?
Yep.
I'm gonna have to check it out. Yeah.
It doesn't spoil anything because it happens in the first 5 pages or so, but this flurry of characters you meet right at the outset, these media personalities who are vacationing, get on their private jet to head back to New York, and the jet explodes and lands in the ocean, and the rest of the book is just the backstory. How did we get here? Who are these people?
Oh, that is interesting.
It is.
Well, but we're not talking about. Well, we are talking. About these things.
I was. Yeah.
You were talking about it. But
that's the small talk. That's the small.
That's
talk.
just the small talk. The big talk.
Right.
All of that. Yes, is about 1931's James Whale directed Frankenstein. It's so. I want to kind of start with this, just because I'm always mostly curious. You having never seen any of these. Mostly curious to know what you think about them. So please, let's start by saying what were your general impressions of 1931's Frankenstein?
Well, you and I chatted on the phone after the day after I had watched it, and I did enjoy Frankenstein. I'm anticipating this possibility, hopeful probability, that Dracula and Frankenstein are the worst of the bunch. And what I mean by that is, there is a way in which a couple of these stories, those two specifically, are so ingrained in the DNA of our culture that it's really difficult to watch it with any level of surprise attached to it, which is unfortunate. And I'm not, which makes it sound like I'm dissing the movie. I'm really not. It's just, kind of like Split. Okay, well, I know enough about Split to know I'm interested in it, so I'm going to go watch it, and I'm going to have some surprises and have some fun with it. Well, this movie is almost 100 years old. Frankenstein, like Dracula, is iconic. Just classic horror character. And so I will say, and also, unfortunately with Dracula, I had Dracula Bites as a template. Well, I've also seen Young Frankenstein.
Right, which is very much a parody of this film. Right. Lots of direct analogs. In fact, before I knew this wasn't his name, in my notes I started referring to Igor, which is not the character's name. That's not the character's name.
In the movie, it's Fritz, right?
Yeah, it's Fritz.
So no, I enjoyed it. I'm in a way that some of the movies we cover don't tend to be. The themes are a little on the nose,
Yeah, I agree with this one. Yeah,
I do think there's a couple of directions we can go with it for our context that might be a little less on the nose, or at least a little less conspicuous. But no, I enjoyed the watching of it. It is fun to kind of check these off the movie bucket list, as it were.
Sure.
I'm tracking through the Universal monster movies in a way that I would not have otherwise. So
sure,
it's enjoyable.
And I totally understand it. Stephen King had said in his book, Danza Macabre, which I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm probably not. But he had said in that book, he as an English teacher, he always used to say Dracula was the most well-known book nobody had read. Like, everybody knows that story, and nobody's ever actually opened the book and read it. And I do think Frankenstein is kind of the same way. But what's interesting about Frankenstein is, unlike Dracula, which Dracula was, as we talked about in that episode, more an adaptation of the play, which was an adaptation of the book. Unlike that, Frankenstein is attempting in some way to be a straightforward adaptation of the book. And yet, it is so dramatically different from the book. It is insane how different this film is from the original book. I'm not going to go into all of the differences right now because it's not totally substantial, but first of all, I wanted to say that the iconic look of Frankenstein is nothing like the way he's described in the book. It is very much the work of brilliant makeup artist Jack Pierce, including the bolts in the neck, the very flat head.
Yeah, the flat brow.
Yes, all of
what's
that.
What's funny about you bringing that up specifically is, as I'm sort of countering myself now, talking about how little surprise there was in the story, I was genuinely surprised at how impressed I was with the makeup effects. I think for a movie 100 years old, our sort of generation, we don't expect much out of something that dated, in terms of effects and things like that. But I found, while of course it was representative of what we've seen over the course of decades of Frankenstein, I found it to be a bit more signature, a bit more classy of a makeup effect than I was expecting. And that was a pleasant surprise. I wrote that down. I was like, wow, that really looks better than I would have expected. Not just from the makeup doesn't look like crap level, but in the terms of a distinctive, very distinguished looking character.
Right. And I still think that reveal, the first time the monster comes onto screen and like sort of turns his head and comes into the light, that's one of my favorite shots in the film and one of my favorite moments in the movie. I wanted to say just a couple of quick things and then we'll move into likes, dislikes. This was a direct and immediate reaction. The creation of this film was directly related to the success of Dracula. Dracula, Universal had kind of put a risk out there to see how it would do. They had not been doing very well. They'd been losing a lot of revenue. Dracula was one of their first successful films in a long time, and it immediately caused them to say, okay, well, we're going to start a whole slew of horror films, which gave us, the Universal monster movies. And Frankenstein was an immediate reaction to that. In fact, Bela Lugosi was offered the part of the monster that went to Boris Karloff. Even did makeup tests for it. As
in he had already done Dracula and then was also offered Frankenstein?
Yes, and he was also offered Frankenstein, and he turned it down, largely because he did not like the idea of playing a character where he wouldn't have any vocalizations other than and all this other stuff. He basically thought
he had some of the best lines of the script.
they're certainly clever. But Lugosi honestly kind of thought at the time that it was beneath him, and he expressed in his later life that he regretted turning that down. But yeah, of course it went to Karloff, who I don't know if you noticed, but you wouldn't have noticed, but he's 44 years old when he does this film, and that was like his major sort of breakout role. He'd been doing a lot of work before that in the 20s, but that was like his big breakout star-making sort of role.
Do you have other iterations of Frankenstein that you're fond of?
I do really like Kenneth Branagh directed Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Okay. Yep.
I do really like that. Of course, I adore Young Frankenstein. I mean, that's kind of a riff on this, but I love Young Frankenstein.
Putting on the Ritz.
I gotta give props. I have to give prompts to Herman Munster. I love the Munsters, and
wow.
and I love Herman Munster, who is the Jack Pierce makeup. It's that that vision of Frankenstein, as it were. But yeah, I mean, as far as a representation of the story, you know what else I enjoy? There's a version that was made for TV. TNT did it. I can't remember the director, but it stars Patrick Bergen as Victor Frankenstein. His name is Victor in the novel, but he's Henry in this film. And it stars Randy Quaid as the monster. But it's actually really creepy.
Wow.
Much more faithful to the original novel, and is pretty darn good if you can find it.
That's funny that you meant that as a throwaway, but so he's Victor in the book?
Yeah, he's called Victor Frankenstein in the book. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because the whole time I'm watching the movie, I keep thinking Victor, but then they keep calling him Henry. Like, oh, okay, whatever.
Yeah, they changed his name to Henry. I forget. There was an intentional reason behind it, though I can't recall what it was at the moment. But yeah, they formally changed his name to Henry for this film. But yeah, he's Victor in every iteration.
Speaking of Split, your boy James McAvoy did probably about 2 years ago now. I don't know if it's called Frankenstein or I, Frankenstein. He plays
I know what you're talking
the
about.
Doctor, and young Harry Potter,
right.
Daniel Radcliffe plays Fritz / Igor, which is I found funny. I'm like, Daniel Radcliffe is such a handsome young man. Like that's just not really great casting there.
What hump? Yeah, I haven't seen that film. That's the other,
I haven't seen it either.
That's the other thing is there's 1,000 versions of this story. Like they're everywhere, but I still keep coming back. Honestly, sincerely, with the possible exception of my fondness for the TNT version, this is number one for me. This iteration directed by James Whale is, I think, for its time, given an asterisk of qualifier that for its time, it's very of its time, but I think it's a masterpiece. I think this is a brilliant film. I so love the opening of this movie. The opening of this film where the actor Edward Van Sloan, who you may recall was played Van Helsing from Dracula, but he comes out, and I just love that whole, before the credits have rolled, before anything else happens, he comes out and he says, a word of warning. And for me, anytime I watch this movie, that immediately puts me in the mood and the right sort of mindset to watch this movie. I honestly wish, although it would be probably a bit too heavy-handed to try it now, but I honestly wish, I was reflecting not that long ago about how essentially opening credits in films are done for. They don't, like, action is happening over opening credits anymore. There's no more of this sort of theatricality where the opening credits are going to roll and then we're going to dive into the story. It's all just right into the action. Things are happening, while you're seeing the sort of spot credits roll up. And part of me misses that. Part of me misses it's probably the live stage performance lover in me, that part of me misses this whole, hey, this is our sort of overture, as it were. We're presenting this for you. Like, he's very much, when he steps out on stage, like, that's the kind of thing that you might see before a live stage performance. The director come out or someone
kind of acknowledging the artifice.
Absolutely. And then you get to escape into this fabricated story, and I just adore that.
It's not the same as what you're describing, but similar. The only other movie I can think of for myself that I've seen, though I do adore this movie, is Moulin Rouge.
Oh yeah,
At the very beginning, it's got that big curtain and the orchestral, the conductor and the orchestra in the bottom. And
I think that films these days, they too quickly dismiss that element in our sort of postmodern sensibilities. I think we've actually lost a bit of that. But the idea that you're about to enter into an experience, you're about to engage with an escapist story, and this is going to be, separated out from your day-to-day reality. And I think that films today have lost a lot of that invitation into that kind of experience. And it just makes me a little sad. And when I watch movies like this, I realize how much I miss about that. I have just a couple more likes, dislikes, and then we should probably move on. The major thing that I wanted to mention is the moment when the monster, the light in the skylight opens up and the monster is reaching up for it like he's a child.
Oh yeah.
And something about that moment captivates me, and also the fact that when the skylight closes, his hands, James Whale focused in on his hands, and he's searching and he's confused and he's questioning. The idea that this thing, though tall and monstrous looking, is very much an infant. It's very much like it does not know exactly what to make of its surroundings. And I think that's part of what's so compelling about this story in general. And that definitely is present in the novel more prominently, that it is a child that is having to learn and develop these kinds of things. Well, I do
love and I texted you this, like, you could almost accuse this movie of having perhaps unintentional comedic element to it. I mean, the crux of this thematic conversation of God and science hinges solely on Fritz's bumbling, dropping the wrong jar.
Right.
He gets the right jar and just kind of trips and oops. So much for that one. Okay, well, good thing there's another brain sitting here. Oh, I didn't read the fact that it was a murderous, crazy man.
Yeah, I know. Which I find really fascinating. And I don't want to bypass right over the scary moments, although I don't know how scary this movie really is. But at the risk of diving right into theme, I think about that, and I think about the fact that it's an abnormal brain. When the doctor is discussing with Henry Frankenstein about the creation of this thing, he concentrates on the fact that it was a criminal brain. But I find it immensely interesting, and it was probably intentional on James Whale's interpretation of this character, that this creature, this monster, does not appear immediately to act like a criminal. He acts very sort of innocent to a way. That moment with the light, the moment later when he's interacting with the girl, it does not automatically come across like a criminal being. But it's interesting that because the brain belonged to a former criminal, it's immediately pegged as this monstrous thing. And it's immediately defined as this monstrous thing. But there's every indication, particularly through the early beats of the narrative, that maybe with a different set of people looking after it and a different set of care being given to it, maybe it wouldn't have turned out to be this monstrous thing. I think that's part of what's so compelling about the story in general is it's having a subtextual conversation about nature versus nurture. And it's having this sort of exploration of, are we designed to be a certain thing, or is the care and attention we're given after we're born what makes us these things, and what makes us what we are? And I think that's immensely interesting, and I'm not even quite sure what the film's saying.
No, I do think that's a good question. And yeah. Well, I mean, I think some of that might be rooted in the prose text, which I've not read. But I will say, in terms of trying to tie this in a roundabout way into where you're going, I'll say a scary scene was scary / sad is just the father carrying Maria through the town.
That's heartbreaking.
I mean, it is. And it's impressively so for a movie that feels very, understand the nuance associated with this word, but whimsical. The movie has a very kind of low stakes kind of feel to it, if that makes sense. And so then you have a scene like that, man, is just wrenching. And dovetailing into what you're describing is the preceding scene. How did we get there? Well, you have that scene with Frankenstein and Maria on the water's edge. And hear me, like, if I want to be a real jerk, which I can do sometimes, like, there's a little bit of humor to Frankenstein just picking her up and lobbing her into the water. I mean, it's kind of humorous, but at the same time, if you enter into the story being told, it's Lenny of Mice and Men. It's, oh my gosh, she's freaking out and I'm petting her too hard and now I'm going to snap her neck. Like, it just, this, to use your words or to use your idea, this kind of infantile creature who is just gifted through biology with a monstrous physique, thus, kind of doesn't know his own capacity for harming things. Right.
Did you know, interestingly enough, this film was released at the time when the Hays Code, which was, we don't need to go into a whole bunch of film history right here, but the Hays Code was basically a standard that said that the films had to meet a certain moral level of approval. This film had it had an uphill battle trying to get approved by the Hays Code. The scene where he throws her into the river was originally cut because it did not meet the Hays Code approval, because he's essentially killing a child, even though in the film clearly it's an accident, and in the film it's clearly thematically important that he does not know what he's doing. They deemed it unapproved, and so it was cut from the original rendition of it and didn't see the light of day until long after the Hays Code was a thing of the past.
Interesting. So, to your knowledge, in an original cut, did you just presume this is what happened? Like, you didn't actually see it?
Yes. Yeah. So basically you see him interacting with the girl, and it cuts away after she throws the flower petals on there. And then the next time you see the girl, next time you know anything that's happened is when the father is carrying her in. So, which, interestingly enough, without that scene, you think the monster is much more cruel than he is, because without that moment, you don't know what happened to that girl.
Presume some maliciousness.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's fascinating based on what James Whale, the film he crafted versus the film that they approved. And I think that's why some of those things are important contextually, because, and I do think it's interesting. you as the viewer, if you were to not see the moment when Frankenstein's monster picks her up and tosses her into the river, you would necessarily, like, you'd see the father wandering in there. You'd see the scene where the monster was stalking Elizabeth, his fiancée. You would see that scene, and you would presume what you knew had happened to the girl, and you would think that the monster was indeed monstrous, and that he was categorically...
Which, by the way, he's got a pretty impressive GPS. Internal GPS to be able to get to her.
That is true, and they don't ever really explain it.
No. I don't know if it's just a really tiny town.
Probably.
He just goes where he hears the sounds of partying and reveling, and
he's like, well, there's only one place that could be. That is fascinating that they don't really explain how he gets into her bedroom. But the novel explains, and future versions of the film explain that, oddly enough, Frankenstein and his monster seem to have a very strange psychic connection, so that what happens to them, what happens to one happens to the other, and they can, in a sense, sort of feel and sense things about it. The novel hints at those kinds of things, and like I said, there have been versions of the film that explore that a little bit more. It's not present in this one at all, so it does feel like he just sort of happens upon her. But one thing that I wanted to kind of say, and it dovetails out of that whole Hays Code conversation, because they cut that moment. Another line that they cut, and this was widely known for many years before the version was restored, and I'm sure it was the version that you saw. Frankenstein's line, "In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God." That line was cut. They considered it blasphemous. They said you cannot say that line. In the original viewing of the film, a huge thunderclap comes over that line so that line of dialogue is completely omitted. And so it's interesting because that also I find to be thematically crucial to understanding exactly what's happening in this story with its characters. But the Hays Code was interesting in what it decided and deemed approvable and what it didn't. But one thing specifically about that line, "Now I know what it feels like to be God," which I do find a powerful and compelling line. It comes right on the heels of the famous and iconic it's alive moment that we riffed at the top of the episode. But when he says, "Now I know what it feels like to be God," I took note of it, particularly in this viewing. When he says that, "I know what it feels like to be God," he is only referring to ability and power. That's what he says it means to be God. I have the capacity and capability to give life. He's not talking at all about understanding or about attitude or even about intention. And I find that very interesting because we can sometimes tend to approach the subject of when things happen in our lives, or if we have certain events influence our lives, and we try to wonder exactly what God's role is in all of it, or exactly it's not to cavalierly dismiss horrific and tragic things, but the where was God question. Like, if I were God in this tragedy, what would I have done, and why didn't he stop it? And if he has the capacity to save all these people or to heal all these people, why doesn't he? And I found it immensely interesting in this viewing of this film that when Henry Frankenstein says, "Now I know what it feels like to be God," he is only referring to the potential or capacity of power or ability. Has nowhere in his understanding of that what it might mean to understand things from God's perspective, or what the attitude of God towards people might be. Because one thing I took note of is he said, "Now I know what it feels like to be God," but he has no love for this creature. No genuine, that I can see.
Sure.
The only love that he has is as a trophy of his own accomplishments. He has no intention to teach this creature how to be in the world. He has no understanding of how to care for this creature once it has been created. He gives it life, which, by the way, he says he created the monster, but he merely patchworked it together from other bodies. He didn't, he didn't actually create anything. He stitched together, these other things. And the resurrecting agent, as it were, is lightning. which he's not in. He doesn't create lightning. He doesn't generate lightning. He merely harnesses it and uses it in this thing. So this whole idea of him creating this, he's still very dependent upon other things which he had no capacity to create, and is utterly dependent upon to make this thing work. So when he says that that's what it feels like to be God, I immediately take note of the arrogance in that statement, and of the fact that he's so limited in his understanding of what being God must be like, to say like, oh, I have this power and I have this capacity, so now I am like God, which, of course, with my Christian theological framework, I understand like that would be nothing of what it would be like to be God. Power, as you can see in the scriptures, is ultimately rather irrelevant to God. Like it doesn't matter. Here's what it makes me think, and then I've been talking a while, so I'll bounce it back to you. Here's what it makes me think. I, as a 36-year-old man, think nothing whatsoever of standing, walking, using my hands, the day-to-day, my day-to-day capacity, getting in my car and driving somewhere, even having the brain to be able to do my job, or being able to accomplish any simple task that I want to accomplish. But someone who has a disability, or someone for whom that would be very challenging to try to do, someone who is a paraplegic or even a quadriplegic, to them, they would look at me and I would understandably, and maybe this is being a bit offensive, hear me, listeners, that I'm not intending to be offensive of people with disabilities. If this does come off this way, it could be perceived that they would look at someone who has the capacity and the abilities that they have, and that they would desire those abilities. Maybe they don't. Maybe they are perfectly at home in their own framework, that is not something that they long for. But it would be a folly for them to look and say, oh, if I could walk, then I know what it's like to be Reed. Or if I could do these other things, then I know what it's like to be Reed. Simply having the abilities that I have does not mean you know what it's like to be me. That's basically what I'm getting at. Is simply being able to do the same things that I can do doesn't give you any sort of access to understanding how I work and why I perceive things the way that I perceive them, or why I do things the way that I do them. And in the same vein, having the power or the capacity to do things that we consider God-like still gives us no closer to understanding what it's like to be God. I know there's a big long diatribe. That feels very Jobin. Oh, Jobian.
Else I will tell you, your own right hand can save you.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're putting down there. I mean,
I apologize for its clunkiness, but hopefully you and listeners understand.
We're all used to. I mean, I'm about to return your clunky for some super clunky, and hope that as iron sharpens iron, we're all going to show grace to each other, and trusting that we are all just exploring and not explaining.
Amen to that.
And we're still right. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. No, I think this is what you're describing is sort of what I meant by there's a degree to which some of these themes as they're presented in the movie are very on the nose, which doesn't mean they're not worth exploring. It does mean, yeah, what does it mean, quote unquote, to be God? What does it mean to exercise that level of power? So I'm going to take, so I'm feeling, listeners might be like, man, Nathan's a little subdued. If you listen to Carrie and what was the other one we did? The Exorcist. You'll remember that Nathan just had a baby, and I'm tired. So there is some truth to that subduedness, but also what you're sensing is restraint that might be unshackled here in a second. So, Reed, my friend, I'm going to throw some things at you, and hopefully these listeners will be gracious in things too. So you're usually our scripture man. Well, you're either gonna be like, hey Nathan, don't take my role from me, or you're gonna be like, I'm impressed.
Yeah, boy.
So even when I watched this movie, I started having these thoughts, and I just needed some time to sit down with them, and they are far from conclusive. But there's a germ of some ideas that are developed from the themes of this movie. I couldn't help but watch this movie of a man exercising his own sort of natural giftings and fabricating ultimately what is sort of a monstrosity, but, putting this patchwork, you use that word, this patchwork, this pastiche, this this cut and paste version of a life together, this cut and paste version of an expression of essence, you know, and I couldn't help but think of, you'll love this super broad brush, the church in America. And I went to a couple of scripture places. I'm going to reference them specifically. One is Colossians 1:18. The other one is, enjoy this joke, 1 Corinthians 12:16, 1 Corinthians 12:16. The Colossians verse says Christ is head of the church. The 1 Corinthians 12:16 passage is all about, you know, the body that is the church. Paul says, if the foot should say, I'm not a hand, I don't belong, I'm not a part of the body. If the ear should say, I'm not an eye, you know, this sort of warring of the body. And so the specific sort of thread I'm trying to draw here is body. It's bodily. It is essence and body combined. What does that mean? So I'm going to run with this for a second. So the Colossians one says Christ is head of the church. To me, I feel like that language is very specific. Paul could easily have said Christ is the heart of the church, right? I mean, it seems, and I know there's other scriptural references talking about, you know, the heart or the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, these sorts of things. But he specifically in this illustration uses Christ as the head. Okay. So what does the heart do? It feels. That's all. You know, it expresses emotion. Well, what does the head do? It thinks, it discerns, it perceives, it processes. There is a way in which, like, people are going to be at a certain point like, Nathan, geez, lay off the church. And I get it. I want to. But, you know, if there is a tacit sort of agreement between my dear friend Reed and I, and that you sort of enter into when you listen to us riff about these things, that says we're going to take inane pop culture stuff and blow it up to say, how are these I mean, this is criticism 101. You know, how do we take these things that we're observing in the world around us, in this case, in horror movies, and make them applicable to our spiritual life? Right. Because that's the conversation we're interested in having. So to me, I look at the world we're living in right now, and I think we have created a Frankenstein monster. We, the church. You look at this body passage of 1 Corinthians, and to me, Paul is saying, like, don't be, in the movie's language, Henry Frankenstein. Don't do that. Be careful. Don't go get a brain from here. Don't go get ears from here. Don't go get eyes from here. Right. You know? And I'm going to get a little bolder now. Like, to me personally, I in no way conflate the church in America. I think this is Nathan. This is not even necessarily Reed. I think it's a bit, this is a strong word, but it's late on a Sunday night and the Super Bowl happened. I don't care about the Super Bowl. You know, I think it's mildly heretical to like conflate the church and America as inextricable entities. But many people do it. You know, a lot of people do it. A lot of people in the church do it. But when you conflate these two things, people tend to focus solely on a few insanely specific issues as paramount. Right. Well, what happens when you do that? You neglect the rest of the body. And what do we end up with? Not an emperor with no clothes, but a body with no head. A body with no head, because we are so intent on driving the machine. We're so intent. Reed, I know you're sitting there. You're like, listeners, I told Reed in pre-briefing for these, I'm like, I'm not sure what my themes are here. And you sent me some themes, and now you're probably like, okay, you can stop talking now.
No,
but,
not at all.
But I'm going places. So, you know, scripturally speaking, perhaps it sounds like I'm suggesting Christ isn't present at the top. Maybe I am. I don't know, honestly. But I do know that you listener, if you believe yourself a thinking, discerning Christian, one, please do yourself the favor of at least attempting to extricate the church in America. You will find yourself open to a whole perspective on kingdom that you never thought possible. You know, the kingdom itself is meant to be an independent, transcendent nation, right? It is not bound by geography and people type. That said, if you can't separate those two, pay attention who's at the top of the nation right now. Listen to him speak. It is gibberish. right? It's not the mind of Christ. It is not mindful. The kingdom has no head. I can't help but watch this movie and think, holy cow, we, the church, are Henry Frankenstein, and our monster is out of control. It's out of our hands because instead of focusing on a uniform, Christ-minded, discerning body that says complexity exists in every facet of our life and cannot be distilled simply into, it's just funny that this movie is this, a black and white sort of thing, you know, we kind of screw up. On top of that, I promise I'm going to let you talk, Reed,
you're fine.
At the same time that we have forsaken having a brain, you know, Christ is the head of the church. We've forsaken having that head. We've also stopped being curious. And that's an insanely troubling thing to me.
Yeah.
Because we don't know everything. Like, I fancy myself pretty smart. Pretty bright. If by bright, I mean having the capacity for being smart in many areas. Not necessarily smart in many areas. But I can still recognize I don't know everything. You know, but so many of us behave. I mean, look at Henry Frankenstein. I know everything. I am God. I am like God. I am like unto God. I have created life. It is alive. Right. But what is the it? It is a monster. Mm-hmm. And he knew that from the beginning.
Yes.
You know? So we behave and move through life as though we do know everything, and we get in trouble time and time again.
Oh, yeah.
Or we're so regimented in our views, we leave no room for possibility. My final sort of note on this massive out of nowhere diatribe is my fear is we are content with just the husk of a body, forgetting that body needs breath. The breath of God, the essence, you know, like we are so content with just having the form without the essence, without the function.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever.
It does to me. Absolutely, it does. So here's how I'll respond to.
Is it annoying? Is it annoying that I'm like completely jumping ship and going off into? Are you like, Nathan, come back to shore?
No, it's not annoying at all. In fact, I have two responses. First of all, I want to be very clear about my feelings towards what you've laid out about the marriage and the homogenization of the church in America. Let us pause for a moment and remember that America is very, very young. I was listening to an audiobook. Man, this has nothing to do with Frankenstein, but I was listening to an audiobook about about the making of The Princess Bride. That's a fun movie, and it was a very fun sort of audiobook to listen to. Carrie Elways wrote it, and he said in it, he reflected on the fact that when they were doing filming, several places they were on location in Europe, and he said you realize when you stand in those places just how young America is, because you're standing in castles that have been there for centuries, whereas even now as we're recording, America is no more than about 200 or 300 years old, whereas some of these places around the world are millennia old. And when you step outside of that understanding, and then you recognize that the earth is even older than that, and that before all of that, God was, it is very challenging for us to, how I feel about what you've expressed, just that singular element, is that when we marry, how goes America, such goes the church. It's what C.S. Lewis called, and what I would deem here as chronological snobbery, which says that what we have here is what has always been, and what, you know, that what we have here is the way that it was always intended to come to fruition. And I think we do ourselves a tremendous disservice to both America and to the church to homogenize those together and pretend as if how goes the church, so goes America, or how goes America and so goes the church. I think that wisdom and discernment would separate those things out, at least in the capacity to say, hey, they are not completely and utterly dependent upon one another. Now, that's not to say I don't balk when I hear the song God Bless America. I don't balk when I hear the statement God Bless America. I don't balk when I see patriotism and theology expressed in the same sentence. I don't necessarily balk at that. What I do have a tendency to balk at is people believing that the survival or thriving of America is God's foremost mission. I disagree with that. I disagree
Sure.
with a mindset or a mentality that would say that the foremost thing on God's heart is making sure America is great again. I apologize, listeners. I know that this is getting a bit heavy-handed in that regard, but I do feel like it's vitally important. However you feel about, let me speak from the other side of the fence for a second. However you feel about things that are of vital importance to our moral fiber, to our security, to our national security, however you feel about those things, there are people who love Jesus and they sincerely love Jesus, and those things are of utmost importance to them. I mean no disrespect whatsoever in the thoughts that I'm expressing about separating out and compartmentalizing the life of America from the life of the church and from the body of the church. I don't mean any disrespect to the concerns that I know you have. Just because they are not my concerns does not mean that they are not of concern, is what I'm trying to say. But I do think we do ourselves a tremendous disservice when we begin to believe that, that we are this great thing. I think I would immediately echo that when we say like, oh, America is what's all important, and we are the greatest nation, and we are the ones who we hold the holy grail of all that God's intention is for the world around us. When we do that,
we're in deep trouble.
We are in very deep trouble, and we sound, to me, very much like Henry Frankenstein. It's alive. It's alive.
Yep.
Now I know what it feels like to be God. I am not about to criticize our current sitting president in the statement that I'm about to make. I'm not criticizing him. There's an image that I saw on social media of a representation of the image of Jesus Christ carrying suitcases saying, now I'm headed back to the White House. Here's what I will criticize. I'm not about to criticize our current president, but here's what I will criticize. I will criticize anybody who thinks that he ever left. Anybody who criticizes the fact that I had a statement when, and I think I've even expressed this on the show before, or at least on a show that I was doing before, where people would say, how do you think Jesus would feel if he was sitting there watching these horror movies with you? Or how do you think he would feel if he was sitting there watching this movie or that movie with you? And I respond these days by saying, you think he's not? Like, you think there's anywhere that I can go that I'm apart from his presence or his eye? You think that there's anything that I can do where he's not attentive to my utmost needs? And at the same time, do you think there's anywhere I can go where I can sort of be a surrogate and take his place and sit in that throne or put that crown on my head?
So what you're saying is this is a very special episode of The Fear of God because it is the last one. We are shuttering the podcast.
Every listener is just gonna turn us off.
It's gonna naturally just morph now into the love of God. We're just gonna watch. We're gonna watch Facing the Giants.
Yes.
And we're gonna watch
lots of romantic comedies.
I can't even right. Left Behind, maybe.
But
I think, and I'm totally cutting you off. I don't mean that, but I feel like we're on the same page here. It's like, to me, you are an eminent diplomat, and like
to a fault.
Not necessarily. I think all I'm trying to get at is, one, yes, that meme is atrocious. What you just described, I've seen it too. To me, I tweeted something recently that, who knows if it ticks someone off, I don't know, but I hate the God's man rhetoric. I liked our previous president, and I would bristle at someone referring to him as God's man in that context. It doesn't matter precisely who it is. What I want to say to someone is, okay, let's set that aside and let's recognize that you are God's man.
Mm.
You are God's woman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, stay humble, stay open, stay sensitive, stay compassionate, and get to work.
Yes.
Like, that's what troubles me, because we are so content, like we have let forces outside of our control create this Frankensteinian thing. I don't even mean like, do I mean specifically Donald Trump? Who knows what precisely I'm saying here in terms of the Frankenstein, but I think we all sense that sort of like whoa, there's this unwieldy sort of, when we try to exert control and authority and declare certain things as certifiably of God that might not necessarily be so.
Right.
We're starting to fabricate the monster.
Yes, absolutely. I would even interject that I think we are of almost equal danger to equate anybody in leadership with either God or the devil. That when you recognize
Sure.
that they are anything other than a leader who will have certain capacity to do good and a certain capacity to do evil, and that could sway in either direction depending on how things go, it is important to keep God, God, and to keep the devil, the devil. And I think when we...
And to keep you.
And to keep us, us.
You know?
I completely agree. Yes, that there is... It's important that we understand what we're describing and how we're describing it. And when we view the other side of the fence or our side of the fence as either God or the devil, we are approaching insanity. We are approaching madness because you can't criticize God. So that means if you view your leadership as God's thing, then you're not going to be willing or as willing to stand up and say, you know what? You've done about 12 good things, but these 4 over here are awful. And you really need to be attentive to these. And if you equate them as the devil, then you are not going to be as willing to say, you know what? There are about 14 things over here that are atrocious and inhumane. But you are trying to do these other 3 things that might be valuable for us. So you have to keep God, God. You have to keep the devil, and you have to understand that everything else is human beings doing what human beings do. I think the opportunity is that when we recognize that God has intention, that the enemy has intention, and that people will have any wide variety of intentions, we will be in a much more healthy way able to compartmentalize and understand and navigate through this treacherous beast of what we see happening in our country at present. And I think that if we homogenize any of those things in any capacity, we're going to lose our grip on being able to do that in a mature way.
Well, and yeah, I mean, yeah, this is why we're friends. But, you have to stay open. You have to stay curious. You have to attempt humility. We're not always going to get it. And I understand that. Like, people are people, and we stumble and we fall and we pick ourselves back up, and then we stumble and fall again. But like, I'm trying to tie this into the movie, but what happens? The Henry Frankenstein yelling, "It's alive." And then 20 minutes later, once his monster has broken loose, is a humbled man. A humbling will happen to you.
Severe.
And wouldn't you rather just stay humble and stay curious and not get inflated and not think you know everything? To me, that sort of, I do think there's a tension here. It sounds like I'm saying, well, let Christ be the head of the church, and thus you don't bother with that. I'm not necessarily saying that, because I think we are called to be like Christ.
Yes.
And so does that mean we are, quote unquote, the head of the church? That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is you've got to use your head.
Yes.
You know, you got to figure out what it looks like to use your head, to use your heart, to be a whole person that doesn't have ears fighting against eyes and feet fighting against noses.
Right.
Because that's what Paul describes as dissension and a broken body.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway,
I couldn't agree more with you. I'm gonna, as a potential.
This is a wild.
Here
one.
we go.
This is a Frankenstein monster of an episode.
As a potential final note, and to tie these ideas together, I'll bring in, I think you've already deftly brought in several scriptures, regarding the body and regarding its place. That's a very important scripture to me. The idea of one part of the body can't say to another that I don't need you. That's right. Of vital importance for us to grasp and to understand. But in terms of Henry Frankenstein's position of like, now I know what it feels like to be God, I wanted to bring in, I'm probably going to reference this again because it's something that I think is critical for us to understand. But I'm going to briefly read a section from Exodus chapter 32. It's when Moses had led the people of Israel out of Egypt. They were in the middle of the wilderness. He had gone up to Mount Sinai. He had been gone for a very long time. And Exodus chapter 32 and the first verse, I'm going to read just 4 verses of scripture here. It says, "When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, who was Moses' brother, and said, Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Aaron answered them, Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And then they said, hear this, listeners, then they said, These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. And here's how I'm going to tie all these things together, possibly as a way to land this episode.
Sure.
Henry Frankenstein says he created this thing. But as we've already pointed out, he patchworked it together. He built it together out of things he dug up. He did not actually form anything. The people of Israel at one point, an entire nation of people, took things that they knew came off of their bodies, took things that they knew were gold and had been fashioned and had formed. They put it together. They put it in a fire. They made it into a shape. And they looked at this thing that they had crafted with their hands and they said, This is the God that led us out of Egypt. They looked at this thing and said, This is what God is. Listeners, here when we're talking about national consciousness, when we're talking about theological consciousness, when we're talking about the importance of the church being the church and God being God and the devil being the devil, when we're talking about these things, be mindful in your own life and in your own heart of your capacity to build your theology around what you have in your hands and having this God that you yourself have fabricated out of some sort of sensibility, out of some sort of your own experience and called that God. That, make no mistake, if that happens to us, that is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is not the God who is holding all of these things together. That is not the God that is the head of the church. We are in tremendous danger of piecing together things from places in Scripture and from theological understanding and from forming that together and saying, this is what God cares about. And this is all that God cares about. He doesn't care about this. He doesn't care about that. He only cares about these things. Be mindful of that and beware of that, because we are at no less of a risk of fashioning golden calves out of the national flag any more than the people of Israel were out of the earrings and their own gold. We are in tremendous danger of forming a God from our own hands and from our own minds, and we are at perilous risk of saying that that is the God who was and is to come. And ladies and gentlemen, it's not. Anything that we form of our own selves, that's not God. And we must recognize that He is ever and forever beyond us. And we need, as you said, Nathan, to humbly walk with Him, to humble ourselves and recognize that we are not in control and that we are not in charge and that we must surrender and submit to something beyond ourselves if we have any hope of actually experiencing His presence in our day-to-day lives.
Well, and I want to have the last word here, or let someone else that I think we both like have it. So, as your friend and as a listener to all the things you just said, I think it'd be easy to hear us both and say, "But then what?" To which I would say, "Yes, you're exactly right. But then what?" This is the beauty and plague of to me the faithful Christian life is. Okay, you stay humble, you stay open, you stay curious, you stay compassionate. Beyond that, I'm gonna quote Eugene Peterson here, which is not scripture, but the man is walking scripture. And I saw this, I follow a Peterson quote thing on Twitter, and this arrested me yesterday. And I feel like it's appropriate to what we're describing. And the quote says, "It looks like I'm going to have to let go of what I expected and enter a mystery." Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's it. That is it. You gotta, you read the scriptures with an open heart and an open mind. You walk through life with an open heart and an open mind, being sensitive to, I'm not even going to quantify so much as to say phrases like the movement of the Spirit or where the Lord's working. I think those are very denominational kind of phrases. I just mean you stay open. You stay sensitive. You stay compassionate. You recognize that all your attempts at quantifying God and life are probably things that, like Peterson says, you need to let go of and just realize it's all mystery. and be kind of okay with that. You know, this is what you referenced several weeks ago. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I keep coming back to it, Reed, that, you know, our orbit is relationship.
Yeah.
But what about this scripture? Well, okay, let's throw that in the stew. But what about this scripture? Okay, well, let's keep it all in the stew, trusting that our relationship with Jesus is going to, through the course of our life, help refine and define what these things mean.
Yes.
Knowing that we aren't smart enough. Yeah. It's all a mystery. That's all I got to say about that.
To which I would say amen. And, the word of God, it's alive. It's alive. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we went a little longer than we expected to, but I think it was I enjoyed the conversation immensely. We hope you did. And if you have anything that you'd like to add or cuss us out, then you can do that in a variety of ways.
You can do that.
Yeah.
We'll receive
it. Absolutely. You can do that in a variety of ways. You can reach out to us. Probably the easiest way is on Twitter. What is our Twitter handle, Nathan?
It is @TheFearOfGod.
You can also follow us on Facebook. You can like us on Facebook and post your comments there. You can go to morethanonelesson.com and post a comment on one of the individual posting for this site. You can also email us, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @ReedLackey. And Nathan, where can they find you on Twitter?
@TheNathanRouse.
@TheNathanRouse. And we haven't really pushed for this in a while, but I would encourage you, please, if you listen to the show, if you enjoy the show, we've sat at the same level of iTunes reviews for a little while now. If you could please pop over and give us an iTunes review, we would greatly appreciate that. It really is the easiest and best way to expand visibility of our show to other people. So you can do any or all of those things. We'd greatly appreciate it. This, as we've said, is part of our Universal Monsters series that we're doing all year. So I'm going to tell you what film we're going to companion it with next week. Ladies and gentlemen, I alone am responsible for this. We are talking about 1985's Stuart Gordon directed as a companion film to Frankenstein, Reanimator. Now, I want to tell you, I should caution, if you've never seen this film and you want to check it out to make sure that you see it before our conversation, that it is very wild and at least one moment, very offensive. So I'm just letting you know right now that it is adult content, complete adult content. But we will be talking about it next week, and I'm sure Nathan will express all of the ways in which he enjoyed this film tremendously. So we will see you next week, and until that time, thank you very much for listening. Nathan, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I appreciate it.
No problem, my friend.
Bye-bye, guys.